Welcome or welcome back to the Contra Costa Public Safety Candidates Forum. And during this portion, we will be meeting candidates for Sheriff Coroner. We will start with a 3-minute opening statement so candidates can tell us about their experience, priorities, and why they are running. When we move to the questioning portion, we will give the same question to each candidate, and they will have up to 2 minutes to answer. And as I said before, the candidates were not given these questions before this event. Candidates will also have an opportunity for a 60-second rebuttal upon request and an opportunity for a 60-second rebuttal of the rebuttal if requested. And then we move on. At the end, each candidate will have 3 minutes for closing statements. Out of respect for the candidates and others, including us, let's agree that all audience members will be polite and attentive and as quiet as possible. Mr. Livingston was the winner of an earlier coin toss. Well, I'm sorry, yes, Mr. Terrio deferred because he won, but Mr. Livingston will be giving his opening statement first. And then during the questioning portion, we will alternate who speaks first. Okay. Mr. Livingston.
Well, first of all, thank you for having me here tonight and having us here tonight. I think this is very important for people to get a chance to know who their candidates are for sheriff. A little bit about myself. I started with the city of Fremont as a police officer and was promoted to the first line supervisor, which is sergeant there, served as a sergeant, a lieutenant, and then a captain. And then I was selected after a competitive process to be the chief of police in Pleasant Hill. I served there for 3 years, and then Concord recruited me to be their police chief, and I served there for 5 years as chief of police in Concord. So around 2010, I ran for sheriff and was elected. And the last two terms, I ran unopposed as sheriff. We've done a lot in the sheriff's office. The sheriff's office is a large agency, over 1,000 people. Obviously, we have primary responsibility for patrol of the unincorporated areas, but also for the custody operations. Those that are remanded to our custody by the courts are held until their criminal matter is resolved. I like to share with people that, for example, we have about 175 inmates facing murder charges right now in Contra Costa County, another 70 or so facing very serious sexual assault charges. So the people that are in custody are typically serious or violent offenders. Most of the lower level offenders have been released or on their own recognizance. So we have high standards in the office of the sheriff. We hold people accountable regardless of their position. We've got great diversity throughout the agency. The community universally tells us that they're pleased with the services that we provide. There are occasional incidents. There was obviously the shooting case in Danville that garnered much attention. But in the meantime, the deputies in the field handled over 400,000 calls for service during the same year period. So I think people need to understand that we recruit the best. We're very selective on who comes on board. We train well, and our whole goal, and my goal as sheriff, is continuing to have transparency and work with the community that we serve.
Thank you. Mr. Terrio.
My name is Ben Terrio, and I want to tell you a story about why I am running for sheriff and where I come from is part of that story, because it defines me and our great profession, which is law enforcement. I grew up out of state in western Montana on the Flathead Indian Reservation. And as a boy, I had a lot of experiences with our tribal government because my father was the tribal chairman. And he had a lot of contact with the tribal police. So I had tribal police contact as well. And I looked up to the police officers in our tribal police force, and it led me to want to become a member of law enforcement from the time when I was a little boy. I followed that dream and that pathway to be in law enforcement by joining the United States Air Force as a military policeman, and then served honorably, including a combat tour in Iraq. I followed my dream of being in law enforcement by joining the Richmond Police Department. I was hired by then Chief Chris Magnus, who is now the head of Customs and Border Patrol. During the time in Richmond, we made significant gains in community policing, and at one point was even recognized by Barack Obama for being part of what would be called a progressive police agency in the 21st century policing concept. All those experiences led me to where I am today. I've served in numerous capacities in our police department, including as a vice detective and as a gang detective, and have numerous training responsibilities in my police department. I'm also the president of our police union, and that is a very wide, experienced, and detailed job that one must have. I also serve on the board of PORAC as the PORAC director for the Bay Area, and I represent almost 9,000 public safety professionals in that capacity, for people who do great work day in and day out. This gives me a wide variety of leadership and experience when it comes to understanding the laws that affect law enforcement, policy, management of what police do or don't do. I have a lot of contact with our elected officials because I've actually worked with them hand in hand on police reform and for moving forward the dial on where law enforcement needs to be. This is impactful because I'm running for sheriff because we are devoid of leadership in this county when it comes to law enforcement. The sheriff's office should be leading the way, and for far too long it has been following. I want to change that. I want to reverse that. I want Contra Costa to be the leader of law enforcement in the state of California. Too many things that have come and gone where we have been following, or we are just now getting to it, as you see we'll go in tonight, where we could have been on the front end the entire time. Thank you.
Thank you. Now we are going to move into the questions. And as a reminder, you get 2 minutes, up to 2 minutes, and you can request a rebuttal.
Thank you. And our first question will begin with Benjamin Terrio. The world is a different place in so many ways since the last time we had a sheriff election. Law enforcement oversight is one of those areas where the conversation has truly shifted. Both of you promote transparency as a priority if elected. What will that look like in policy and in practice for your sheriff's office during your term, both internally and externally? And how would you encourage community participation in oversight of your department?
So in the first 100 days of being elected sheriff, I want to form an advisory council of people across the community, various groups, business leaders, faith leaders, and I want them to become part of an advisory council that provides feedback to the sheriff's office, also that we can provide to them on what the things that we are doing and how we can advance law enforcement in this county. I think that's important, and I think we need the community buy-in to have that. There's nothing wrong with oversight that it's for the sheriff's office or law enforcement in general. Many places have it. We have it in Richmond. I participated in it for many years as the police union president. And there's this aversion that somehow we in government should not be responsible to the people. I think it's all in how you do it, but I think it's very, very important because it does promote transparency and it does build legitimacy and trust. And people have been clamoring for that, and they deserve that.
Thank you. David Lutz.
So obviously transparency, especially today, is critically important. And I've been asking the Board of Supervisors, for example, for 5 years for funding to have body-worn cameras on all of our deputy sheriffs. That's over 800 people, over $1.3 million ongoing in cost. We finally achieved that in the current budget. We've also added deputy sheriffs to patrol our neighborhoods and support our businesses, and we're adding even more in the jail. Unfortunately, as Ben has been the leader of the association, he stood by why the city council in Richmond has actually decimated that department and cut the positions. For a violent city, it just makes no sense to me at all. But as far as being transparent and oversight, we already have oversight from the Bureau of Prisons, from the Attorney General, from the Civil Grand Jury, and the sheriff, as set out in the Constitution, is directly responsible to the voters. So I am leery of having a group come in that would then say, these are the priorities that the sheriff's office should be pursuing. It's fine to have dialogue. We do that now. We particularly do that at all the station house levels. And I was at a community meeting last night in Crockett. But to have an appointed body, I don't think the Board of Supervisors is interested in that either. It's more of having open dialogue, transparency, sharing policies, inviting input, but giving one body authority over an elected position. It would be like saying you have to now oversee the district attorney and make decisions about what the district attorney is doing or charging. I think that goes down a very slippery slope. So I support transparency. We're doing that now, and we will continue to do that. I also support working with all the oversight agencies that we currently have.
Thank you. Any rebuttal?
Sure. Unfortunately, the sheriff doesn't have his facts right. I actually saved 35 positions in the city of Richmond. So I don't know where you're getting that number, but that was a campaign that I actually helped inform myself with our union, and we saved 35 jobs with that, which was the original intent of the people who were trying to defund the Richmond Police Department. In fact, I don't think there's anyone in law enforcement on a leadership level that's fought against the defund the police as a method more than I have. And then secondly, talking about transparency, transparency is important because you have to hold yourself accountable also as an office holder as well. And what I mean by that is when you have an organization like the Sheriff's Posse that has put people on a sheriff's official gun range and then had that person arrested for possibly taking guns to the street, you have to be able to hold yourself accountable and say, you know what, maybe we should have an outside investigation. So again, it is different in how you do it, but something has to be done because people are clamoring for it.
Thank you. Any response?
Yeah, I'd like a response. You can look at the budget in the city of Richmond. They eliminated 12 sworn positions in the 2021 budget. Perhaps they were expecting to eliminate more. He was able to get that down to 12. But the fact of the matter is that they should be adding staff in Richmond, not subtracting it. You need a leader there. He calls himself a leader as a police officers association president. He should be leading and stopping that action. The reality, he has no support from any other police officers association. I have numerous agencies and organizations supporting me, including my own Deputy Sheriff's Association, over 800 members who have confidence in my leadership, in my transparency, and my willingness to make change.
Thank you. Okay, we are on to the second question, and we will start with Mr. Livingston. The two fatal shootings involving now former Sheriff's Deputy Andrew Hall in Danville have received a lot of attention. While we understand the second case remains under investigation, the first obviously led to criminal charges and convictions by a jury. What has been learned from those incidents and their outcomes? Do you feel enough is being done to hold officers accountable for excessive use and misconduct? What, if any, changes should be made?
So as an agency head, Ben hasn't even been a first line supervisor. He hasn't even supervised anybody in the office there in Richmond. I've been a supervisor, command officer, an executive command officer, a chief, and a sheriff. The responsibility falls on us, and I've terminated deputy sheriffs. It's as difficult as that is. Reprimanded, held them accountable in numerous ways over the years I've served. So people may not think that happens, but it does happen. In the case of Deputy Hall was sent to a call, responded to a call where a person had initially yielded. We approached the car, that person sped off, and then through a slow speed pursuit through Danville, started coming up a street where they made a blockade. They thought he would stop. The subject did not stop, started to weave through the blockade. The officer felt his life was in danger. That's why he fired the shots that he did. We did a thorough investigation and we found he was within policy. 2.5 years later, District Attorney Beckton decides to charge this officer. And remember, that officer was out handling thousands of calls for service while this case was supposedly pending and doing a fantastic job. So we found that he was within policy. I thought the criminal charges were absolutely political. She placed it on her Facebook ad, crossing her arms, smiling, "I charged the police officer." It's reprehensible, in my opinion. The first officer charged in Contra Costa County. This isn't him kneeling on someone's neck for 9 minutes, the horrible case we're all familiar with. This was a split-second decision. That's why I've said what I said about that. I'm the leader of the agency and I support his actions. If he's within policy, he acts honorably and he obeys the law. And I believe he did all those things.
Well, I think this is exactly why, talking about experience, experience would have led you to have better policies that would not have put Officer Hall in that predicament in the first place. It's the policies that come from the top and transcend down to the bottom to the deputies that actually have to do the work. And when they have to go out and do the work, they follow the policies and procedures of the agency. And if things have been done differently, perhaps that incident would never have happened. And in fact, it shouldn't have happened. But that's the difference from actually being on the ground right here and right now and actually doing this work. Because if you haven't been on the ground as a law enforcement officer in the past 5 years, you have no idea what it's like out there. And that's the difference. It's great to have been a police chief and all of that, but if you haven't actually been doing this job in the past few years on the changes in society and reform, past 10 years, then you, quite frankly, you're out of touch. And again, it's the management policies and procedures of an agency and how they affect and transcend through the agency that affect what people do. And if it's one way at the top, it will be one way at the bottom. And that whole incident should never have occurred.
So in rebuttal, I would say that's ridiculous. And it's unfortunate that a fellow police officer would question the actions of another police officer. I'm sure Ben has been, particularly in the city of Richmond, in very dangerous situations. I've been in a situation where a person shot himself in the head with a rifle 6 feet in front of me. So these things happen. And we train to them, we hold people accountable, we try to do the best job we can. But being a peace officer in the field is very difficult. It's very challenging. So we give them the tools that they need. We do a very thorough review. We work with their outside counsel for the interview process and we make a determination. So to suggest that we don't have policies or the leadership necessary really does a disservice to police officers that have to make those split-second decisions.
Yeah, it's not attacking the police officers to do the job. It's attacking the management who creates the policies that ensures the jobs that they do. And I mean, one of the bigger, larger things that's missed here is that as the sheriff, it's okay to come out and say that we can do things better and differently. Sheriff Livingston didn't even meet with the family. Regardless of whatever situation is, we should have the empathy in law enforcement for those who were affected by our actions, whatever the case may be, to actually have the empathy to meet with families, to say, hey, there are things that we can do better and change. That didn't happen. Instead, Sheriff Livingston doubled down on that, sent a message internally that was put out on the media. And quite frankly, it was out of touch. And it's not where society wants to be. And it's not what I think we should be for building legitimacy and trust in law enforcement. It doesn't help us.
Thank you.
Thank you. Let's follow up on several of the key themes underlying that last question. We'll start with Benjamin Terrio. How would you evaluate the effectiveness of existing training, particularly in the areas of de-escalation of violent situations, working with individuals with disabilities or mental illness, and implicit bias by deputies and sheriff's administration?
Training is the most important thing in law enforcement. It's also very expensive, but it's also something that we cannot let go of or reduce. And unfortunately, a lot of times that's what happens. So there's minimum standards in the state, but we always need to go above and beyond, especially when it comes to, de-escalation is taught at the academy from day one. Communication, all of that is imprinted in law enforcement. However, we have to be able to go beyond that. We need to work and understand that we do all have implicit bias. We need to work on how we interact with the public when it comes to procedural justice and explaining people what our actions are, what we're doing. Not in the split moment, but when things are calmed down and cool. And I think that's what people want us to do and what they want society is asking of law enforcement for us to do. And we have to be able to move that and rise to that level of training. I also think it's important to have training that has the public as part of the training curriculum. That way you have buy-in from the people who actually are concerned with whatever our practices are. And then we can make sure that we're doing the best job possible when it comes to training. That's what I would like to do. I would like to see different forms of training that encourage the community to be a part of it, because that's how we're going to get through this us versus them barrier, all these things that have hurt legitimacy and trust for us.
Thank you. David Livingston.
So we have a support services bureau that's responsible for all of our training. This is the ongoing de-escalation training, use of force training, negotiations, all of that continues year in and year out. But when it came to some specialty training like implicit bias, we brought in national experts, and I required that every member of the office, including myself and all the command on down, and all of the civilian staff, receive that implicit bias training. And it was very well received. So everyone in the agency has that training now. And we're looking for other opportunities to bring in even newer training, best practices. So I think that plus working with the community, hearing what their concerns are, what training they recommend, particularly in a custodial situation, will make us a better and more effective agency. But training is key in all areas, not just bias. And we do a pretty good job with that ongoing training.
Thank you. Any rebuttal?
On the mental health part, a mental health and behavioral health crisis is something that law enforcement needs to become divorced from. Not fully, because that's never going to happen, but we need to be able to change the paradigm that we're working in. And we need to ensure that we are more of a support model for this behavioral health and mental health response and not the primary responder. I think that's something that's very important. I don't think there's been a massive CIT, crisis intervention training in the sheriff's office for some time. Maybe that was due to COVID, but that's something that's very important that should be taught and taught across the spectrum. But again, going back to behavioral health and mental health, how we in law enforcement respond to that is crucial. We need to participate in the county's A3 model. We need to ensure that we are moving ourselves away from being the primary responder to these types of crises and supporting the professionals, the qualified professionals who actually do the work.
Thank you. Any response?
Yes, on this point, I agree with Ben. And I think that we have a track record of doing that. We are doing exactly what he is suggesting. We are putting together alternative response teams. A police officer or deputy sheriff doesn't have to be the first person to respond to a mental health crisis call. A clinician would be ideal. But there are cases where there's threats of violence or actual violence or threats to harm themselves where we do need to have a police officer present. And that will not change under my leadership. But if we can send someone that is a clinician to handle a call, we'll do that. But in addition, we've put together 3 different, what they call mental health evaluation teams, MET teams, where officers go out with clinicians after the fact to make sure that the person they interacted with is receiving treatment, medication, etc. So that also will continue and will only expand over time throughout the whole county. Mental health response is a very important issue, and we want to be at the forefront of that issue.
Thank you. We are going to start with Mr. Livingston, this one. Property theft crimes are at the forefront for many residents these days. Smash and grab incidents, ransacking or raiding of businesses, and catalytic converter thefts in particular seem more and more prevalent and a true disruption to quality of life. The sheriff's office, like most law enforcement agencies, espouses goals of community policing and crime prevention in addition to solving crimes. How will you work to make sure these and other property thefts are investigated thoroughly when they occur? And what steps can you take to help prevent these crimes before they happen?
We'll have some specific steps that I can share with you. But first of all, let me say it's completely unacceptable what we've seen in the last 2 years as far as the thefts of businesses. Obviously, the Walnut Creek event is the most pressing in people's minds, but it occurs in other locations too, this organized retail theft. We are aggressively investigating those cases. And when we had, for example, the situation in Walnut Creek, I immediately called the chief. I worked very well with all the chiefs of police throughout the county. And I said, I want to offer my services at no cost to increase patrol, to have greater visibility, to hopefully make the shoppers in that area and people in that area comfortable, but also to be a deterrent to those who might come and do another smash and grab organized retail theft. So we provide those services as something we do as a sheriff's office to agencies that need our assistance, and we will continue to do that. But we also need a partner in the district attorney's office who will charge theft cases. And that has not been the case. And perhaps this issue came up earlier with Becton and with Knox, but we can put together a case, we can make an arrest. There has to be accountability. There has to be an intervention with that person who in most cases has committed multiple crimes. And remember, despite the county spending millions of dollars on reentry services, we still have about a 70% reentry problem, basically recidivism problem. So unless that changes, we're going to be continually chasing the criminal conduct here in the county. But we do have a zero tolerance. We add patrol deputies, we add investigators to handle, and we work with businesses to protect their business. But we do need a partner in the DA's office as well. Otherwise, the person's released before the police report's even written.
Organized retail theft is a serious problem. The theft and the changes that have come over the past few years, I think, need some modification. It doesn't necessarily mean that all reforms have to be thrown, the baby out with the bathwater, so to speak. But there needs to be some tweaks and changes. And I think the community is demanding that. But how this applies to the sheriff's office is about data and crime trends and data analysis. And unfortunately, under Sheriff Livingston, there is no more crime analysis, and the crime analysis professionals have all withered away. This is a huge problem because it's hard to track, if not impossible, to track crime trends, who's doing what, and criminals don't respect borders. They don't care about, especially organized criminals. They go wherever. And if we can't track and trace those people who are committing those crimes, if we can't reach out and have inflow of data and information throughout the county, throughout all with the municipalities and beyond regionally, then how are we expected to solve crimes? So again, not having crime analysis within the sheriff's office is a huge problem. It's also important just to understand crime prevention in general. Every rookie cop in the Bay Area was watching how in different commercial districts, high-end commercial districts, there were these organized retail thefts. It should come as no surprise that it was going to come eventually to Contra Costa County. And sure enough, it did. The sheriff did something about it after, which is great, but I think we probably should have had some people in place beforehand. That probably would have helped prior to. That didn't happen. Also, when there were a few arrests made, unfortunately, people were in all the craziness in communication, and I'm sure there's a reason for it, but people were released out of custody who were brought in custody for these crimes and released. They were again apprehended, etc. But that kind of communication for something so serious as it was is important.
So I would just say that Ben has mentioned numerous times, the crime analysis unit. Well, we had 2 crime analysts who left recently, largely over a pay dispute and a benefits package, and they are now supporting Ben. So we are recruiting to fill those 2 positions that will be very helpful to us as soon as they're up online. So to say that, we're decimated with 1,100 employees, we can certainly fill the gap that the crime analysts were doing, which is basically going over police reports, looking for trend data. So I'm not as worried as he is. Whatever intelligence we need, we can get. We get top secret information from the FBI, from other federal partners. If there's trends, we can follow them. We're in a good position. And later, I'd be happy to talk about cameras and the effectiveness of cameras and the example of Richmond, who's completely failed their community by not authorizing cameras. And we'll talk about that when it's time.
Well, unfortunately, the crime analysis positions, there were actually a lot more of them before us, just being left out of the story. They actually used to be embedded. There were so many of them, there were more of them. They were embedded into the investigative units in the sheriff's office, which is appropriate. And then over time, they just whittled away and now they're gone. That's great to be provided additional information from the other alphabet soup of federal agencies. However, that's not going to give you local, on the ground detailed information about trends and what's going on. And then how are you going to be able to provide transparency to the public about what is occurring as well? So, I mean, that it does affect things. Every modern police department has crime analysis. It is the standard. It is a best practice that you have to have.
Thank you. Next question, we will begin with Benjamin Terrio. There sure seemed to have been an escalation of gun violence incidents over the past few years, and certainly an increase in use of ghost guns. What can be done to make our community safer from gun violence?
There's multiple things at play. One, obviously, is an enforcement method. I'll get to that in a second. But there's good preventative models that we need to implement and utilize that CalVIP, for example, provides, working with nonprofits to actually reach out to the communities, people who do commit the gun violence. And this has been controversial sometimes, but you have to have a strategy that has multiple prongs to work. And I think that's important. Back in the day, it's enforcement, that's it. That's a part of it. But things like ceasefire have had success. There are other programs that CalVIP has put forward and sponsored, and nonprofits that give people alternatives of things to do besides, participate in criminal violence. And I think those need to be bolstered. On the enforcement end of things, however, polymer 80 guns, I see them all the time because, again, I'm out doing this job day in, day out. They are prolific and out in the street all the time. There needs to be some laws that close the loopholes for them in gun sales at expos and things like that, because people are just walking away with them. That needs to be addressed on a legislative level. But on another level with prosecution, when people are caught with these guns, they need to actually be aggressively prosecuted. I support that 100%. I filed those cases numerous times as a gang detective, and it is a problem, and we need to deal with it.
Thank you. David Livingston.
So the Operation Ceasefire he's referring to is Richmond's idea of paying people not to kill each other. And if you look at the statistics, the reality is it's about demographics, not about people not killing each other. So keep paying them. The reality is there needs to be accountability. When you're talking about a violent crime with a firearm, we're going to make arrests in Contra Costa County. We're not going to hold their hand, give them a paycheck, say, please don't shoot somebody. It doesn't work that way. And it's not going to be successful long-term. So that's first, enforcement. Education is important, particularly in the schools. Alternatives to dispute resolution. We've seen it before where a simple dispute suddenly devolves into gunfire. We had the incident, of course, on the Halloween holiday in Orinda, where we had 5 people murdered. They brought guns in, killed 5 people, and we were attacked for not responding fast enough to a noise complaint. The reality is the people should be held accountable then, and they should be today. And our district attorney has failed because we went forward with warrants signed by a judge for 3 individuals, including one up in Marin City, that we put our officers in danger's way to go make an arrest. But the DA chose not to charge them. And the reason was, well, we can't really prove it's not self-defense. So we're battling that in the background. But the reality is there has to be strict enforcement for gun crimes. Ghost guns, the same thing. If someone's caught with that, manufactures it, trades it, we will enforce it and support not only ATF and FBI, but our local office if the DA chooses to charge that case. So it's a rubric of several approaches. It's a serious problem, and it's something that we cannot turn away from because it's only going to grow in certain parts of our county.
Thank you. Any rebuttal?
Absolutely. Unfortunately, the sheriff doesn't have his nonprofit and different types of organizations and groups correct. Ceasefire. So what he was referring to is actually Office of Neighborhood Safety and a Fellows Project, et cetera. That's a whole different thing. Ceasefire is actually a program that worked with the district attorney's office to ensure that there was prosecution and people were held accountable on the carrot or the stick approach. In fact, Mary Knox, I believe, was a part of that. So that's the difference. You do need different types of approaches. It's not a one size fits all for all of when we're talking about violence, especially gun violence. But the dealing with polymer 80s for possession of, yeah, zero tolerance.
Thank you. Any response?
I stand by my statement, and I think there'll be ample proof the payments were made to those who were identified as offenders for gun violence, first of all. Second of all, cities make decisions like Richmond to say, we're not going to have body worn cameras because we're woke and we don't want to offend anybody. Meanwhile, Danville does install cameras, and they have an incredible rate of apprehension of people that enter their city, either in stolen cars or wanted cars or domestic violence suspects, what have you. Not the case in Richmond. So every city in the county should really embrace cameras in public roadways. See, this is not a privacy issue, at least in my opinion. So there are many changes. Another is Oakland. They say they're not going to search parolees and probationers. Well, many of our robberies that occur in Orinda and Lafayette are ultimately found to have been committed by people living in Oakland that are on parole and on probation. So when one city makes a ridiculous choice, it impacts all of us, and that has to stop.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Moving on. Back to Mr. Livingston.
Okay.
We've talked a lot about the criminal investigation side of things, but of course, another major duty entrusted to the sheriff's office is county jail operations.
Yes.
What are your views on the treatment of incarcerated individuals in county today, and how should that change in the future? Please also touch on aspects such as the adequacy of county jail facilities overall and mental health services for detainees.
Very important issue. As I said, I have no choice about who comes in the jail. The judges remand them, or the police agencies bring them to us, and then it's my responsibility to safely care for those inmates as their criminal trial progresses. But one thing we do in Contra Costa County that a lot of counties don't is we have a very aggressive custody alternative program, which is to say you've either been sentenced for typically a lower level crime, or you have a case pending. We're not going to keep you in physical custody. We're going to put a monitor on you, have you check in. We're going to make sure that you're with your family or attending the job that you have or school, so that we keep them out of custody. That's very important, and it's a very successful program. But there are those that I've already mentioned earlier, the several hundred that are facing very serious criminal charges. So while they're in our custody, we want to provide whatever services we can, and we're very aggressive about that. GED, education, English as a second language, basic core courses, a full range of mental health courses as well. And on that point, we just recently finished a several $million project to enhance our M module, our medical module in Martinez. And I've been fighting for 5 years for the mental health and reentry facility located in Richmond, in what we call the West County facility. And that's part of the reason, frankly, that when the city council of El Cerrito took a position, they were asking me to dispatch for them. And I'm at that very moment fighting with Sacramento to try and get that 90 million funding for the benefit of Contra Costa County taxpayers. They take a position opposing it. It was clear to me that there would not be a helpful working relationship there. Turns out we did receive the grant, and we will have a state-of-the-art family reunification facility, mental health treatment facility, and we'll actually have children come into child-appropriate rooms to have interaction with their adult person who's confined. So I think it's going to be a fantastic program, and it's frankly cutting edge.
I'll start on the last part. That was a non-binding. The El Cerrito thing was a non-binding resolution. It meant nothing. It was non-binding. And losing out on that money cost the sheriff's office 2 deputy positions. So start with that. Mental health services, quite frankly, don't go far enough in the jail. We need them. Obviously, there are certain types of people that are in custody that need those services. However, what we need to do is break down that jail is going to be the end-all be-all solve for anything with mental health. That's why I support the A3 model. The sheriff's office was not present for any of that stuff until, unfortunately, even in 2021, a year ago, they only had 1 Met officer, and now, we're doing a lot. We're going to go we have 2 more positions coming. We're just still throwing a bucket into an empty swimming pool. It's not enough. The mental health services that are provided by the jail, it's great. I think we should have them, but we need to solve the larger problem and advocate to get the larger problem fixed. And that means working with Anna Roth and company with the behavior and mental health issues and with A3 and turning that into a crisis response model that actually works, that provides 24/7 Met officer coverage through the entire county so that we can back up and support what actually occurs for those professionals that do that work. And we're not involved in it because that's what society is demanding from us. As far as jails and reentry services, all of that is great, but we need to actually increase that. We need to have more apprenticeship programs for those who are in the jail. And the sheriff earlier talked about spending millions on reentry and the accountability of that's exactly the point. We need to ensure that there's some accountability for the programs that are actually put forward by the sheriff's office. So we know what's working and what's not. And if people aren't doing their job, then we'll get a new program or something different in there. That's the type of transparency and data I want to provide a sheriff.
So just as rebuttal, I wasn't speaking about the sheriff's office. I was speaking about the Community Corrections Partnership, which doles out the money from the state to nonprofits and other organizations to do the kind of work that's supposed to help transition those out of custody. And there are some successful ones, I'm sure, that do a good job. But the reality is this whole mental health issue impacts us in the field and in the jail. And so it was important for us to have a facility supported by Anna Roth. And we, by the way, Anna Roth and I have worked together on A3 for years, and you can ask her about that. I just don't, shout from the mountaintops when I'm working with other leaders to get things done. This new building will be, as I said, state of the art. No one wants to receive mental health treatment in custody. I get that, but it's not my choice whether they're in custody or not if it's a felony and they have mental health issues. So we want to at least do the best we can to treat those people, and we will.
Response.
I wish all of that were true, but as far as mental health evaluation teams, and I watched the A3 presentation. I didn't see a single sheriff's official there. And as regarding, mental health evaluation teams. And again, the jail thing is one part of it. It's about what are we doing beforehand and after? What is the long-term solution that the sheriff's office can be a part of and can lead in Contra Costa and beyond in changing how we respond? In 2012, the sheriff's office sent command staff to learn about mental health teams, MET teams. In 2016, the sheriff had an opportunity to implement that. The other cities in the county did, Richmond, Concord, Antioch. Sheriff's office took a pass. And then finally now in 2022, we're going to get a couple more officers in the CCSO, again, not for 24/7 coverage, but partial coverage to help A3. It's not enough. And again, the history shows what it shows.
Thank you. Next question, we'll begin with Benjamin Terrio. We are aware in many fields, public and private, there are issues with employee retention and recruitment really coming to the forefront since the onset of the pandemic. How would you describe employee morale and staffing levels within the sheriff's office today? And how positively or negatively does that impact the department's ability to handle its responsibilities?
It's huge. Unfortunately, over the past few years, the morale in police departments and law enforcement everywhere has plummeted. So this is a cascading effect across law enforcement across the United States. In the Bay Area and Contra Costa County is no exception. So what that requires is us to have bold new ways to try to reach out to different communities and then outside of Contra Costa, but we can also reach out to leaders and those who actually have the ear of people in this community to say, hey, we need new blood. We need young people to get interested in this job and be aggressive about that. The people who can do this job are out there. We have to go out and find them. That means doubling down. We can use vacancy savings to increase recruiting budgets, but you can leave no stone unturned to do that. We have to make those types of efforts. And then we have to have, and then make sure that we're doing a diverse job And that doesn't mean just in ethnicity, but in what types of life people are coming from. And ensuring that we actually go out and seek people who are in colleges, people who are in trades, people who have never, ever considered doing law enforcement. It won't just be people like me who had a story of, wanting to be in law enforcement their entire life, or people who are ex-military. All that is great. That's my story. But we have to go out and seek people from other places and other walks of life to ensure that this profession moves forward. We are at a critical time and juncture in law enforcement regarding recruiting. We have to make these extra efforts. And, we can't shirk on the standards at all, but we have to make the efforts that, quite frankly, if we don't, all public safety will suffer.
Thank you. David Livingston.
Well, it's one thing to talk about it, and it's another thing to do something about it. Here's what we're doing. We are actively recruiting people from various cultures, various backgrounds, men and women, to join the sheriff's office, and that continues today. In fact, I made some remarks today to an internal group of women employees, both sworn and non-sworn, what we call civilian, about 70, about what they can do to move laterally, promote, sell and sing the picture of the sheriff's office and help with recruiting. We've staffed up our recruiting unit. We just recently went to historically Black colleges and universities and met with individuals there to support that effort to get people to come and consider law enforcement. And we will continue to do that as well. And we have a deputy sheriff's association that works side by side with us. And as far as morale, I think morale is good. Now, I was criticized for saying I have someone's back in an internal memo. If you took the time, or if Dan Borenstein took the time, what it actually said, if you read it, is if you obey the law, if you follow policy, follow procedure, I will support you. Not just I've got your back generally. There was much more to that memo. And I think people appreciated having a leader that didn't just throw everybody under the bus, but stands behind their people. And I do that. However, if they are out of line, if they've committed an offense, they will be held accountable. Is there a reason you're shaking your head, ma'am? Is there a reason you're shaking your head at me?
Let's
Yeah, okay. Just, if you would not do that, I'd appreciate it. So the reality is that we are serving the population that we serve, but we are doing it with accountability, with morale in mind, and we're doing it as a team with the union that works in the sheriff's office. That's the deputy sheriff's union, the primary one.
Thank you. Any rebuttal?
Absolutely. You need to make a place in the modern day attractive, and you have to offer, put opportunities for people to do. So inside the sheriff's office, many people, they come out of the academy and then they go to the jail, and they have to wait a few years before they can move to patrol and be patrol certified. That creates essentially two groups of people who go and can be patrol certified, which a lot of people don't know, but on the inside of the sheriff's office, you cannot advance or promote without being patrol certified. So it's very important. Also, so that stymies people's ability to move forward in an organization. When you bring lateral officers over, they don't start at a high step or high enough step, step 5, or they start at a step 3 instead, which is a middle of the road step, where you could actually bring more people from other places and convince them to come to the sheriff's office if you offered them better incentives. And that's simply changing some labor agreements, which I'm sure the GSA would be more than happy to do because it benefits people in staffing, or working with the HR of the county. But you've got to create opportunities, and people don't feel like they have the opportunities within the sheriff's office unless they pass patrol.
Thank you. And Mr. Livingston.
That's nonsense. What we have is when we hire brand new deputy sheriffs, we move them in typically into the jail assignment first, where they work for about 18 months. Then if they're interested in moving out to a patrol assignment, we offer patrol and then patrol training, and they transition out to a patrol assignment. But depending on that person's time of life, what they have as far as childcare, other issues, they may prefer a custody assignment or a civil assignment, or be a court's bailiff, or work on the civil unit, or work in the coroner's bureau. There's lots to do in the office of the sheriff. We need all sworn deputies. The model he's talking about is more akin to having non-sworn jailers run the jail, something I've resisted. I want to have deputy sheriffs so that they can train when ready to move out and take a patrol assignment. And the DSA would let me know, the Deputy Sheriff's Association, if they had a concern about what we were doing as far as staffing patrol versus custody. That has not been brought to my attention.
Thank you.
Thank you. We're running a bit behind, so we are going to wrap up the questions. And now each candidate will give their closing statements of up to 3 minutes. And we are starting with Mr. Terrio.
Thank you. I'm here, I'm running for Contra Costa County Sheriff because the sheriff is not lit. The sheriff could have had body worn cameras in 2016, like many of the municipalities could have got grants for it, could have gone out and advocated, been on the cutting edge of something, did not. As we talked about earlier, the office could have been on the forefront of the mental health evaluation teams, could be leading the region, maybe even the state in this regard, and now is playing catch up. Talked about the city of El Cerrito, which he punished for daring to speak up on a non-binding resolution that cost deputy positions. Good leaders make good decisions, and experience should lead you to make good decisions. And if your experience isn't leading to that, well, then I think everybody needs to question that experience. I think that's vital for people to know going forward. Leaders make good responses when it comes to mental health, 911 calls, the distribution of deputies. All these things are things that the sheriff is talking about changing that conveniently has just magically appeared and fallen out of the sky. Now, I've come to know that imitation is the highest form of flattery. And I think it's great that the sheriff has essentially cut and pasted my platform, but I wish he would have done it before. And that is why I'm running, because I want CCSO to be on the cutting edge of law enforcement so that it can transcend to the rest of the county partners. I want to be a sheriff that restructures the organization to provide 911 services that come on time so people don't feel like they're left out in the cold. I want deputies on the beat to be able to work patrol and to be certified to work patrol so that everyone can be interactive within the organization and there's not two different groups of people. I want to be a sheriff that is accountable to you, the voter, the residents of Contra Costa County. Not pass blame, but be accountable to you, be transparent to you. A sheriff that values data, that values information and sharing that information with the public. The criminal justice system has made many changes, and we continue to make changes and improvements. But in order to do so, you need someone who wants to lead and actually wants to embrace that cutting edge and embrace being part of the future and not the past. That's what I will do as sheriff. I want to be a community sheriff for everyone in Contra Costa, and that's what I intend to do. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Livingston.
Well, a lot's changed since Ben sat with me in Starbucks and Martinez and begged me to give him the sheriff's posse mailing list so that he could do a hit piece and raise money against Dinah Becton. Times change. He's right about that. But in that intervening time, he's still a police officer. He's not a first line supervisor, not a lieutenant, not a captain, hasn't been a police chief anywhere, and certainly hasn't been a sheriff's office employee. He was asked the other day, can you describe the structure of the sheriff's office? He said, no, I have no idea. So I know that there was a kind of a fringe part of the left part of the Democrats that were out searching for opponents for me 4 years ago. They were looking for police chiefs. The police chief said, no, we're not interested in running against the sheriff. We like the sheriff. We work well with him. This time, the same people, and I won't name them, apparently reached out to Ben and said, hey, we'll raise money for you and give you a shot to run for sheriff. The reality is that I have the experience. I have the broad support across the county. I have elected officials from all parties. My view is public safety over politics. I'm not just going to seek out some of the far left Democratic groups and say who's going to support me. I'm from one end of the county to the other. Going forward, what I'll do is what I have done. Reach out to communities, increase transparency, focus on training, and build the sheriff's office to better serve everyone we serve in the county, not shrink our services like we've seen in Richmond. So experience counts, experience matters. I'm also an attorney. I've been the past president of the California State Sheriff's Association, Ben hasn't done any of these things. He's a POA rep who doesn't get the support of most POAs in the county. So I think people need to take a big look, decide who they want. Do they want an experienced leader, or do they want someone who's not yet experienced? And I'm sure someday he will be. By all accounts, he's a good police officer. And I do respect his service in the military. But the reality is times are changing. We need to stay with someone who knows what they're doing, who can navigate the budget issues, who works well with each board of supervisor, as I do, and who works well with national and federal leaders. That will continue under my leadership, and I ask for your support on June 7th. Thank you.
Thank you, both of you, for participating in the forum. It's good to let the people in the community hear directly from you, and we appreciate that. Again, thank you to everybody who sent questions. In addition to DanvilleSanRamon.com, this forum is sponsored by the San Ramon, Danville area, Brentwood, Pleasant Hill, Walnut Creek, Lafayette, Concord Chambers of Commerce, and Diablo Valley College. We appreciate them for helping us bring this to the public. And a video will be made available by the sponsors soon. Don't hold me to when, but soon, we promise. Good evening. Thank you again. Went a little long.